You could hear the laughter before you even saw who it came from. It echoed through the grand concert hall in Oslo, bouncing off marble columns and velvet curtains as technicians finished setting up microphones for what was supposed to be a cultural exchange rehearsal. Standing at center stage was a tall Norwegian violinist, world famous, impeccably dressed, his priceless instrument tucked under his arm like a badge of superiority. Across from him stood a small group of Filipino musicians clutching instruments made of bamboo, wood, and shells, humble tools that looked fragile beside the polished European masterpiece. When one of the Filipinos gently struck a bamboo xylophone to test the sound, the violinist smirked and let out a chuckle loud enough for everyone to hear. That single sound, careless and dismissive, would set off a chain of events no one in that hall would ever forget. And by the time the night ended, the same audience that laughed with him would be wiping tears from their eyes. Before we go any further, pause for a second and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from right now. Filipino pride is global, and it's incredible to see how far our kababayans have reached across the world. And if stories like this make you proud of Filipino talent, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Now, back to the moment everything began to change. The Norwegian violinist Erik Halvorsen had spent decades mastering classical music in Europe's most prestigious halls. Critics called him a genius. Newspapers called him the future of Nordic classical performance, and sponsors treated him like royalty. To him, music meant Stradivarius violins, grand pianos, and centuries-old compositions performed exactly as written. When he first saw the Filipino ensemble unpacking their instruments, bamboo flutes, Kulintang gongs, and a wooden kubing jaw harp, he reportedly asked a stagehand if they were part of the stage decoration. The stagehand quietly explained they were the guest performers from the Philippines, invited to showcase indigenous Southeast Asian music. Erik raised an eyebrow, nodded politely, then turned away, clearly unconvinced that anything made from bamboo could belong on the same stage as his violin. Leading the Filipino group was Maria Liza Santos, a soft-spoken musician from Mindanao who had spent her life preserving traditional music passed down through generations. She had learned Kulintang rhythms from elders in her community, practiced until her fingers blistered, and traveled across the Philippines, teaching young people not to forget their heritage. To her, these instruments were not primitive, they were living history, voices of ancestors carried through sound. When she heard the laughter, she didn't react with anger. Instead, she gently adjusted the position of the gongs and continued tuning, her expression calm but determined, as if she had already faced far worse dismissals before this moment. Rehearsal began awkwardly. The program required a collaborative piece blending European classical violin with Filipino indigenous music, a fusion meant to symbolize cultural harmony. Erik played his opening passage flawlessly, notes soaring with technical perfection that impressed everyone in the room. When the Filipino ensemble joined, the sound shifted dramatically. Deep metallic gong tones, airy bamboo flutes, complex interlocking rhythms that didn't follow Western musical structure. Erik faltered mid-phrase, visibly confused, then stopped playing altogether. He lowered his violin and shook his head slightly, muttering that it sounded out of tune, though the Filipino musicians were following a completely different tuning system rooted in centuries of tradition. The room fell silent, tension thick enough to feel. Maria Liza stepped forward and softly explained that Kulintang music doesn't revolve around Western harmony, but around layered rhythms and melodic cycles. She even offered to adjust the arrangement to make collaboration easier. Erik listened, arms crossed, then responded with a polite but unmistakably condescending smile. He suggested simplifying the Filipino parts so they wouldn't overwhelm the composition. Some members of the orchestra shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others exchanged glances, sensing the cultural disconnect unfolding in real time. Yet Maria Liza nodded again, choosing grace over confrontation because she knew the real performance would speak louder than any argument. As the final rehearsal ended, word of the awkward exchange had already begun spreading among staff and local attendees. Some dismissed it as artistic disagreement. Others whispered that it was disrespectful. Meanwhile, outside the concert hall, Filipino communities across Norway were buzzing with excitement, proud to see indigenous music represented on such a prestigious stage. Many had traveled hours to attend, bringing small flags and traditional clothing, eager to witness a piece of home thousands of miles away. None of them knew that what they were about to see would become one of the most talked about performances of the year, not because of controversy, but because of something far more powerful. Backstage on the night of the concert, Maria Liza gathered her group in a small circle. She reminded them that they weren't just playing notes, they were carrying stories of their ancestors, their villages, their families. She told them to perform not to impress anyone, but to honor where they came from. Some of the younger musicians looked nervous, aware of the earlier tension, but her calm voice steadied them. One by one, they placed their hands on their instruments as if grounding themselves. In that quiet room, far from the glittering audience outside, a different kind of confidence began to grow, not loud, not flashy, but deeply rooted.
If you've ever felt underestimated because of where you come from, stay with this story, because what happened next is something every Filipino can be proud of. The lights dimmed, the curtain rose, and the audience settled into silence. Eric stepped forward first, bowing elegantly, greeted by warm applause. Then the Filipino ensemble entered, dressed in traditional attire, their instruments gleaming under the stage lights. For a brief moment, the two worlds stood side by side, waiting for the first note to decide what this night would become. Eric began with a haunting violin solo, filling the hall with rich, emotional sound that commanded attention. His technique was undeniable, each phrase delivered with precision honed over a lifetime. The audience leaned in, captivated, some closing their eyes to savor the music. When he finished the opening section, he nodded slightly toward the Filipino group, a cue for them to begin. Maria Liza raised her mallets and struck the first gong. The sound was deep, resonant, almost primal, vibrating through the floor and into the audience's chests. A bamboo flute joined, airy and haunting, followed by intricate rhythmic patterns that seemed to ripple outward like waves. At first, some audience members looked puzzled, unfamiliar with the tonal landscape. But within seconds, curiosity replaced confusion. The rhythms layered over each other with mesmerizing complexity, creating a pulse that felt alive. Eric re-entered with his violin, cautiously at first, trying to find space within the unfamiliar structure. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of overpowering the bamboo instruments, his violin began weaving through them, responding rather than leading. The music transformed into a conversation, not a competition, each tradition elevating the other. Maria Liza closed her eyes as she played, completely immersed, her movements fluid and confident. The ensemble followed her cues seamlessly, years of shared practice allowing them to communicate without words. The sound grew richer, fuller, filling every corner of the hall with a texture no one had anticipated. Even Eric's expression began to change, the earlier skepticism replaced by concentration, then by something resembling awe. He leaned into the music, matching their rhythms, echoing their motifs, discovering possibilities his classical training had never explored. By the time the piece reached its climax, the hall felt electric. Fast Kulintang patterns danced beneath soaring violin lines, bamboo flutes spiraled upward, and the combined sound carried both ancient tradition and modern virtuosity.
It was not European music, not Filipino music, but something entirely new born in that moment. When the final note rang out, there was a split second of stunned silence, the kind that happens when people are too moved to react immediately. Then the audience erupted. People rose to their feet almost instinctively, applause crashing like thunder. Some were cheering, others wiping tears from their eyes, overwhelmed by the emotional impact. Among them were Filipino families clutching flags, their faces glowing with pride. Eric stood motionless for a moment, breathing heavily, as if he had just completed the most challenging performance of his life. Then he turned slowly toward Maria Liza and the ensemble. What he did next would spread across social media within hours. Instead of taking the spotlight, Eric stepped back and bowed deeply toward the Filipino musicians, gesturing for the audience to direct their applause to them. The gesture was unmistakable, a public acknowledgement that what they had brought to the stage was not lesser, not decorative, but extraordinary. Maria Liza looked genuinely surprised, then bowed in return, her eyes shining. In that exchange, the earlier laughter felt distant, almost irrelevant, replaced by mutual respect forged through music itself. If this moment is making you proud, tap that subscribe button and be part of a community that celebrates stories like this. Because sometimes the world needs reminding that Filipino talent doesn't just belong on the global stage, it can redefine it. And as the standing ovation continued, one thing became clear. The instruments once dismissed as simple bamboo had just created a sound powerful enough to unite an entire hall of strangers. Backstage, after the performance, Eric reportedly approached Maria Liza with a humility no one had seen from him before. He admitted that he had underestimated the depth and complexity of their music, confessing that playing alongside them had challenged everything he thought he knew about rhythm and expression. Maria Liza simply smiled and thanked him for listening. There was no bitterness, no lecture, just quiet dignity. For her, the goal had never been to prove someone wrong. It was to let the music speak truth on its own. Clips of the performance began circulating online that same night, shared by audience members who sensed they had witnessed something historic. Comments poured in from around the world, many expressing amazement at the power of indigenous Filipino music. Filipinos everywhere flooded the posts with messages of pride, tagging friends and family, saying, "This is our culture, this is who we are." What started as a moment of mockery had transformed into a global celebration of heritage. In interviews days later, Eric spoke openly about the experience, calling it one of the most humbling moments of his career. He described the Kulintang ensemble as masters of a musical language older than any symphony hall, and expressed a desire to learn more. Maria Liza, meanwhile, used the attention to highlight the importance of preserving traditional arts, reminding young Filipinos that modern success doesn't require abandoning cultural roots. Their collaboration sparked invitations for similar performances across Europe, turning a single concert into a movement of cross-cultural appreciation. And perhaps the most powerful outcome wasn't the viral videos or the headlines, but the inspiration it ignited in countless viewers. Young Filipinos watching from bedrooms, classrooms, and overseas dormitories saw proof that their heritage was not something to hide or downplay, but something capable of commanding the world's respect. Parents shared the clips with their children, teachers played them in schools, musicians picked up traditional instruments with renewed pride. So, if you take one thing from this story, let it be this. Greatness doesn't always come wrapped in polished wood and centuries-old prestige. Sometimes it comes from bamboo grown in tropical soil, shaped by hands that carry generations of memory. And sometimes, all it takes is one performance to turn laughter into admiration, doubt into respect, and a small group of musicians into symbols of national pride. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs a reminder of how powerful Filipino culture truly is. And tell us in the comments, which Filipino tradition or talent makes you most proud? Because stories like this aren't just about one concert in Norway. They're about a people whose voice continues to rise, no matter how far from home they may be.